Aloha, and welcome to the Virtual Window Gallery's Artist Talk series. I'm David Samus, and I curate this space alongside Bart Hopkin and Kirk Pearson. As a result of San Francisco's shelter-in-place order, the Window Gallery is not currently holding in-person events at our landmark space at the Center for New Music in the heart of San Francisco's Tenderloin. But today, we'll be having Bart Hopkin interview Doga Cavdir about her virtual exhibition, Sounding Flow, which you can view on our website at thecenterfornewmusic.com. At the gallery, we are showing tonal relativity studies by Alice Santoro, and those will be up through April. They're beautiful diagrams of musical intervals, and she'll have a virtual reception and demonstration on April 18th at 5 p.m. to accommodate a more national audience. Stay tuned for Philip Greenleaf's map scores in May, and another virtual exhibition at the gallery presented by Mariel Jacobson, also in May. In June, we have an exhibition of imaginary musical instrument collages by Tenderloin artist John Vochitzer, whose Calamity Fair brand of Three-Eyed Lady was the symbol for public pandemic art for many San Franciscans. And then we'll have an exhibition by Norman Tuck in July. While the Center for New Music remains physically closed to audiences, we have a great series of streaming concerts over YouTube, and you can find more about upcoming events at thecenterfornewmusic.com. If you're a musician, consider becoming a member and letting us produce your next virtual show. Until then, stay safe. And now, Doga Cavdir and Sounding Flow.
Hello, Doa.
Hello, Bart.
You know, you have this very musical name, which is a Turkish name, and I don't want to try and pronounce it correctly. Can you say it for us? Full name?
Yeah, it's Doga Cavdir.
Lovely. One more time.
Doga Cavdir.
It just seems so pretty to me. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Now, Doa does a lot of very interesting work, and we're going to see three instruments, sort of 1, 2, and 3A and B. So in a sense, we'll see 4. Uh, and so we're seeing a limited perspective on all the things that Doa does. If you want to see more, you can see a lot more at her website. Doa, can you give us the name of that site?
Yeah, it's my name and last name, dogacavdir.com. So it's like DOGACAVDIR.com.
Wonderful. So, you know, looking at the pieces that we're seeing here now, and also the pieces that other pieces that I've seen in different places from you, including your website and other sources, there's a lot of variety, a lot of diversity, and some themes in common. Can you give me a sense, an overview of what you think the most important themes in your work are?
Yeah, definitely. I think two words would be just like movement and sound and their connection. So as a musician and designer, I try to design gestural interfaces and movement-based performances, mostly to create a connection, almost like an intermediate medium between the physical interface and the musician's body. And I think my work generally explores like the correspondence between those two domains, specifically body movement involved or could be involved in music making. But when you think about the first instrument, the movement doesn't have to be limited to body movement. So I like kind of looking into like acoustic movements and like how instruments vibrate too on the other hand. So that I think is kind of like a similar connection between all these three instruments.
Yeah, yeah. You know, a lot of your instruments involve this question of gesture and what you do to get what sound. Traditional musical instruments, acoustic musical instruments, are sort of natural experiments in human interface and in the quality of gesture and so forth. Most of your instruments are not acoustic, although you've done some very nice acoustic things that I've seen. But most of your instruments are not acoustic, so that means somehow you're going from gesture to a sound, and you get to decide what the mapping is. How does that work for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I always ask the same thing to myself because there's not really like one framework for the mapping that works for every instrument. So it's very dependent on like what instrument I'm going to be building. And I actually like to start thinking about the gestures I want to use. So what gestures and what like movements that the instrument wants to, afford for the musician. So I start from that. And I think about the users too. You will see that like in most of the cases, I'm the musician playing it, but then I actually explored, especially with the Bodyharp, asking other movers or musicians to play the instrument. So then I start to think about like what their background is going to be and how they're going to, see the instrument as an instrument, not just like a interface. So then I try to like add some musical gestures and body movement. So try to combine those two domains. And with musical gestures, I think there is a very um, kind of like obvious, connection. We're like very familiar with traditional musical instruments. So if you plug the string, there's going to be this plug sound coming out. So I try to sometimes like play with that familiarity, in the mapping. Yeah.
And there's not only the question of sort of what kind of gesture creates a plucked sound and what creates this or that sound, what creates a sustained sound, but there's also the question of do you call what comes out music? Do you say, I am a composer doing music? And if so, how do you think about music? Are you J.S. Bach operating with common practice harmony? Or are you an avant-garde weirdo making crazy sounds or what?
I would say closer to the second one, but yeah, I especially, I think about the sound as a shared space to maybe enjoy music or like define music too. When you have a new instrument, you actually have like a lot of possibilities. You're not really limited to the physics of acoustic instruments. So it's easy to define, I think, the terms, of music making. And this is kind of the case in felt sound, actually. In felt sound, I was trying to design a musical experience for um, hearing impairment and like for musicians and listeners with hearing impairment who identify deaf and hard of hearing on the side with musicians and the audience members who are not. So creating this like shared experience, then like you need to think about what music or sound can create, maybe a physical sensation of the sound, the vibration itself. So I like kind of try to use those gestures then like in the mapping as a way to shape an existing composition sometimes, or like the soundscape.
And we're going to learn a little bit more about felt sound a little later. I think people will have seen it in an introductory video that we had already, and we're going to take a closer look at it a little bit later. It's funny, I'm a little tempted to say, yeah, but how are you thinking about scales? Are you thinking about melody? Are those things relevant? Are they irrelevant? And I'll ask a question another way. Do you say, I am a composer?
Yeah, good question. I think it's an approach to also instrument design. You can start as a composer, or you can start as a musician or as a designer. And when we think about the traditional musical instruments, there are really like these instruments that you can compose infinite amount of music on them. But new instruments, and actually think about the composition first, and then like ask the musicians to kind of like play with their limits in this composition. So there is an existing, I guess, schema of this music making. And well, what you were saying about like, is it the scale or is it just the sound that you're creating or shaping? I think that depends on the instrument and the performance itself. So in a way that it kind of depends on like the composition.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So in felt sound, it was definitely, there were a set of um, music making like engines, like if you want to say that, as a like a sound, like digitally generated sound mechanism. So definitely, yeah, in that case it was, I was the musician shaping this soundscapes and like actually creating them during the performance. It was more like an improvisational schema. But in Bodyharp, there are a lot more similarities to a string instrument. So I started thinking about, okay, I have this 3 or 4 strings. I have like different levels of, you know, height or like the instrument shape. So how can I like map to different scales and like certain notes? And then that's very limited in actually a traditional musical, compared to a traditional musical instrument. So then I think I start to kind of like make some decisions if I wanted to make it more closer to a traditional instrument. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it really depends on like the performance and the instrument and its affordance itself.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And one of the interesting things, although you mentioned frequently you play these instruments yourself, many times, and especially with body harp, you have other people playing them. Uh, and and so in that case, what you're doing in however you design your mapping, what you're doing is you're creating a set of possibilities for somebody else. And that can be seen as a kind of composition, creating that world of possibilities for somebody else. We're going to be seeing body harp in a minute. I'll be very interested to hear how the dancers that you work with um, sort of learn to love the instrument. How do they feel about this world of possibilities? How do we explore it? That'll be an interesting thing. I hope we can talk about it in a minute. Um, So you have a bunch of training. We should sort of get this out of the way. You've got an interesting educational background. Your bachelor's degree is in
Electrical engineering.
electrical engineering. Yeah, and so you got this BS in electrical engineering. Was it were you like in an odd position being an artist among engineers?
Yeah, absolutely. It's well, I studied in a technical school, so it's not, even though there was some opportunities of, exploring your artistic direction, it is really focused on engineering. And it was difficult. I mean, it was until I started my program, I started calling myself an artist, because I didn't think that that could be a direction, in an engineering school. But I always played piano, and I had like this musical side. Even before I actually started engineering school, I had like dance and then music on each side. So I was they were more separate. I didn't think that it really fit into what I was doing in my bachelor degree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, the piano business, you were doing Western classical music, is that correct?
Yeah, I
Okay.
was I was
Were
playing.
you okay? Were you a killer pianist? Were you a virtuoso? Are
I
you?
wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say so.
But does it color your thinking much, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, playing piano is definitely one main, like, I guess, a motivation. And also, like, always back on my mind when I design instruments too, especially the interaction with the piano and the instrument itself. Kind of, it suggests like different like ideas. Like, you have such a fine control over the tone and like the music you're creating. So that dexterity of like gestures, musical gestures, I always try to incorporate those. So yeah, my piano education is like always there in the instruments that I design.
Hmm. It's interesting to think of piano because the keyboard was one of the very first examples of complex interface design in human industry. If you think about this,
Mhm.
the organ keyboard was one of the first places where people were actually thinking about, I've got this complicated machine to control, how do I control it? And of course, it happened by a process of evolution more than a process of invention. But it makes the piano a really interesting paradigm. So the piano may have influenced you in terms of how you think musically. It may also have influenced you in how you think about uh, the whole question of interface. Nowadays, musical instrument interface, especially with electronics and robotics and stuff, and various kinds of sensors, becomes this big, wide open arena. But a lot of it you can point back to the piano as one of the first examples of human machine interface design on a complex level.
Yeah, as an interface, it's very intuitive. It's very,
Yeah.
and it has a low, threshold to start with. So you can just sit on a piano and just play it. So I think it's a welcoming instrument, but on the other side, it's very steady. So you can't really move with the instrument. As a musician too, you can't really even move with your body. Um, and it kind of like disconnects you from the sound, like resonating body of the instrument and the interface and then the musician. So there's a really discrete like boundaries of those. So that was interesting for me too, like I started dancing before I started piano. So it was, and I think like ballet was like the first thing that I kind of like get to know piano, as like they were playing when we were dancing. So that was an interesting connection for me. And like whenever I like need to express some, like musical, I guess like ideas, when I play the piano, I feel very restricted. So that really became a big motivation in my, instruments too, like kind of how can I add more movement, and how can I like ask, musicians to express with their body movement with an instrument that could maybe like allow them to do so.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. It's kind of perfect. The piano it gives us a perfect way of talking about both the positive and negative of interface design and the question of how closely the human is related to the machine and to the sound. Maybe it's time for us to listen to or see one of the videos that goes into a little more depth in one of the instruments. And I think the one we'll see first would be um, the in vivo.
In Vivo is an audiovisual installation that displays vibration mode patterns projected on a Chinese bell. What you see in the image is a traditional oval-shaped two-tone Chinese bell, which is quite different than standard bells. In addition to their intricate motifs, they are able to sound two distinct tones depending on where they are struck. My work in general highly involves computer-generated sound and observing movement in music making. And in this piece, I wanted to explore both decoupling the sound from its instrument and observing the instrument's inner movement. The installation's sound and acoustic wave motion are generated digitally. The composition is algorithmically generated, and the sound is created using a physical model of a church bell. The visuals are created as an animation, and the projection is mapped onto the instrument's surface. The project uses the bell as a projection surface to expose the acoustic waves vibrating throughout the instrument body. The visual effects are inspired by acoustic vibration modes of the instrument when it's struck at different locations. Here you see the interferogram of vibration modes of a handbell, and the right image is showing symmetrical and anti-symmetrical vibration modes of an ancient Chinese bell. Both of these visualizations inspired me to design the projection in synchrony with the sound. It's important to note that the vibration patterns you see in the installation are not a representative of a scientific measurement, but more of an artistic interpretation. It shows a combination of visualization for the first vibration modes and the individual tracks at different locations with their isolated vibrations dissipating throughout the instrument. By excluding the impact of physically striking the bell, I imagined the instrument as a living thing on its own, and I wanted to create an imagery for what is normally left unseen. The installation was originally set up in a listening room with surround speaker array, creating an immersive audiovisual experience for the audience.
What a what a beautiful bell that is. The bell that you used as the uh, the the thing to be projected upon for in vivo. That particular bell. Can you tell us about that bell?
Yeah, I think every Karma person is very familiar with the bell. It's part of this standing instrument collection at Karma. It's a Chinese bell, so it's a little different than standard bells because like you are able to create two tones with the bell depending on where you strike. And yeah, I was really interested in like just the aesthetics of the bell and like the idea of actually like you know having more musical expression, I guess, and also like having this ancient history was very like touching. So I wanted to use that bell in the installation.
And another nice thing about that bell, now correct me if I'm wrong about this, but that bell was from the correct collection of Thomas Rossing, I think. Did he bring it to come? And so Thomas Rossing, for those that don't know, is one of the leading figures in musical acoustics of the last 30, 40 years. You know, the guy's fantastic. He's a genius. He's written some of the most important resources on the subject. He wrote an entire book just on the acoustics of percussion instruments that featured, I think, that self-same bell fairly prominently. He's written a lot about the acoustics of bells anyway. So it's this beautiful bell that's anybody who sees it will think it's beautiful, but also people who know the associations of that particular bell, that's worth something as well. The fact that it's that bell, it's the bell that Tom Rossing found some inspiration in to do a lot of his writing about the acoustics of bells and of percussion instruments in general. And he did these beautiful studies of the bells and their different modes of vibration, which are very much reflected in what we just saw, right?
Mm. Yeah, it is Tom Rossing's bell. So it's his bell and it's still at Karma. And you can like he did extensive amount of work on like, you know, looking into acoustic, the physics of instruments and like acoustic vibrations. And you can also see maybe more like scientific and accurate forms of like these vibration patterns in his books. In my installation, it was definitely inspired by like Tom Rossing's work, but I also wanted to kind of like have it more, I guess, like a playful and artistic interpretation of like what happens when you play an instrument, when it starts to vibrate, and like what happens and how we can like maybe see it. And that was like the main motivation. Like and like if you look into the installation too, it's the sound is digitally created, so there's actually no impact on the instrument. And then there's a bit of decoupling, you know, like when we think about the computer music, we hear the sound somewhere away from the instrument. And I kind of like took it as an opportunity to also like artificially create these vibration patterns on the instrument.
So it's not a literal representation, it's interpretive, but it's a very expressive interpretation. I mean, it actually feels very musical to me when I look at it. How have people responded when they've seen it?
Yeah, so it's not a very long installation, but it loops, and the loop is kind of very well like blended in. So I think um, people saw it as meditative practice, I guess. Like they kind of enjoyed just sitting there, and it was so. Unfortunately, we can't do that right now, but it was in a listening room with like a surround speaker array, so we were able to actually experience the sound more immersively too. And yeah, I think people enjoyed like just being in the room and like enjoying the installation. I think it was a more meditative practice for them.
And that's a reminder of, sad to say, what we're missing by not having this current installation, the alive installation. For all of the instruments we're going to be talking about today, you know, we find ourselves saying, "Oh man, I wish I could be there." I wish I, this you used the word immersive, and that applies to a lot of what your work is doing. Is it time to look at and listen to another video and another instrument?
Yeah, we can listen to the cell sound. Fuzz sound is a movement-based musical instrument that aims to incorporate non-musical communicative gestures. This wearable instrument connects sign language gestures to low-frequency, high-amplitude sounds designed to produce physical sensations. The instrument borrows from American Sign Language gestures, potentially with or without their overt meaning. The design process is motivated by the ASL song interpretations and the experience of music for those who are deaf and hard of hearing. The instrument is composed of four 3D printed modules. an accelerometer for hand movement detection, finger modules with force sensitive resistors and Hall effect sensors for touch and proximity sensing, magnet modules in multiple locations depending on the desired interactions, and a controller module. These sensors are embedded into the small modules during the 3D printing process to design a more compact and variable interface. They allowed us to customize the instrument in multiple ways to capture different gestures. The gestural composition focuses on a selection of ASL-inspired hand and finger gestures. All these gestures are connected with the music sign in ASL. Gestures for show, poetry, and vibration signs are used to control sound parameters or trigger sound engines. Here's a short video showing gesture to sound mapping. Please remember that these pieces are meant to be played through a subwoofer array and some elements are lost in the videos. You might prefer using headphones for the following videos. This piece was originally performed with a surround subwoofer array, and is meant to create physical sensations through low-frequency, high-amplitude sounds. The virtue of a design focusing on a movement-based performance and physical sensations, thereby through music, is to offer a more equalizing entry point to a musical experience regardless of hearing abilities. Our main motivation was to create a shared performance space for both deaf and hard of hearing listeners as well as those who are not. Please enjoy the short excerpt from our performance session in January 2020.
Doa, do you have a special connection with the community of people that are hard of hearing?
Um, when I was working with Felt Sound project, yes, I did work with an ASL signer, and also I had a collaborator who's a musician and composer who identifies hard of hearing. So I had these experiences, but reaching out to the community is actually difficult in so many ways because we're not designing our lives as, to be as inclusive as possible. So
Mm.
um, I am that's an ongoing process, and like getting in touch with deaf and hard of hearing communities, and also you know collaborating on these projects. But when I started, I had an ASL signer and a hard of hearing composer musician collaborating in the same one.
Are you getting fluent yourself at signing?
I'm learning. Yeah, I'm learning. I'm not really fluent right now. I hope to be soon.
You know, you have another instrument that I saw someplace called Talk to the Hand,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Which is kind of relevant here in an odd way. Can you describe that?
Um, Talk to the hand is just basically an interface that has a microphone, and it kind of lets you to do um, the voice manipulation, or even like sound if you're playing a traditional instrument, with like some hand gestures. So like waving, or it kind of picks up. There's like pressure sensors, so it does like allow you to kind of like interact with some hand gestures. Yeah, it is a similar interaction mechanism. The idea behind it is a little different,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's a similar instrument.
Okay. Um, Now, I'm interested in this felt sound idea. Uh, I've heard this only, I haven't heard it with monumentally huge subwoofers. And I don't know how far down you went. What are you getting down into subsonics with this thing?
Yeah, a little bit. So I think the
Like,
frequency range was around, mm, kind of like around like 30, 40, but not lower than that.
okay, okay, the very, very bottom of the hearing range, so that hearing people will hear it, but we all, whether we're hearing or not hearing people, are going to feel it in that range. And when you did it live, did you like make it really powerful?
I did crank up the volume a lot. And I think the special thing about that performance was I was in this listening room again with letting people sit next to the subwoofers. So I think that was powerful. Being like very close to the subwoofer, also you can feel the floor is a little bit shaking in response to the sound and the high amplitude and low frequency sounds, and also the subwoofers. You can also like touch or interact with them, and I think that even if you don't like have the same physical sensation in the air, you're able to like touch and receive some haptic feedback from that.
And we know that people have a strong, even emotional response to very, very low frequencies. Um, did you did, did you find that to be the case? I mean, aside from sort of information of musical information about patterns and that kind of thing, did you find that people have a very strong emotional response to having their guts vibrated in this way?
Yeah, they were like very interesting, obvious sounding, but like very interesting and very like I guess bodily, like responses. One of them was one person emphasized that the performance and like hearing these sounds were letting them to think about the silences and the sound. So there's like the quality of the sound and the movement was actually changing, and like they were feeling these responses in their bodies, and there were like two points, two ends. Like I think like the silences were very emphasized in that performance, and the very heavy low frequency sounds.
So how do you think people responded? Do they, like, if you said this is music, then it would be something about patterns. If you don't say that, then it's just something about what it feels like. Does the whole thing feel compositional to you, or does it feel more like you're just riding on the feeling of the sound?
I think it's both. Definitely, when I was playing, I had an idea of a composition. But even like when I was playing, I was able to like explore like, oh, if I do this, there's actually a new this sound pattern coming out. So I was like more into like playing those, and there's an active like loop, like when you perform something with your movement, and in response you hear this very like physical sensations from the sound you're hearing, so you want to respond to that too. So there's actually kind of like a positive feedback loop always like running, during the performance. So it had a blues, compositional structure, but I was able to like improvise in between and like react to that. From the audience perspective, I think they were also very interested in like kind of understanding the gestures and like what was causing those gestures, and like also experiencing the music through their bodies. One user said, well, like an audience member said that they were able to hear it more in their torso because there is a big air cavity, and it was actually like they were able to feel that kind of sensation. So it was powerful to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Did hearing impaired people in the audience, did they sort of say, "This is special, I can feel it"?
Um, that's one of the drawbacks and kind of like a shortcomings of our project. We weren't able to have um, many hearing impaired, users. I I experienced, I kind of like communicated with one dancer who was a hearing impaired dancer, and like she was able to kind of like give me like how she was feeling about them,
Mhm.
because then like your body becomes a listening tool. And I think, and especially for a dancer, it is a very familiar interaction. But designing like this instrument and composing the music to deliver the physical sensations, it was like I actually like had to perform with like earplugs and see like how I could feel without actually the hearing part of the music. um yeah, and we had also an ASL signer in the audience, and that was the only actually only like audience members we were able to like find from ASL and um, deaf and hard of hearing communities. But we'll just hope that like in the future we'll be able to like interact with them more. But yeah, that was the main shortcoming of the project.
Okay. Well, it's an ongoing piece, I think, right?
It is definitely, yeah.
You know, a couple of times in this conversation, you've referred to what it felt like to be the person doing the movements that were translated into sound versus what it is to be in the audience. And that actually brings us to the next instrument, which is Bodyharp, which is very much about what it feels like to be having movement translated into sound. So maybe it's a good time now to look at the Bodyharp video.
Bodyharp is a musical instrument that integrates dance-like body movements both into the physical interface and to the musical performance. The instrument consists of two wearable parts, one connecting the musician's arm to the instrument, and the other one controlling the sound modification and shaping. The instrument is designed for musicians to expand their performance space and be able to perform with dancers with dance-like body movements. The first prototype of the instrument is designed in 2018 and performed with dancers and musicians in a site-specific improvisational performance. Here's an excerpt from Act 1 and 2. In the new version, the instrument is designed for both musicians and dancers. We were expecting to see certain gestures like plugging, stretching, or rotating, but the movers interacted with the instrument in so many unique ways.
So here we have an instrument which has very, very distinctive gestural qualities that are built upon the idea of strings. But what I feel when I look at it is, yes, these are strings, but they're really different in terms of what it would feel like and how they move. Because uh, traditional musical strings, they have fixed ends and they have a fixed length, and they have almost no lateral movement. I mean, aside from the plucking movement, these you've got many more degrees of freedom in how you move these strings, and I think it would feel very different. You could sort of say this is imitative of a string, but you could also say, wait, this opens up a whole bunch of other possibilities in terms of the kinds of gestural movements associated with strings. Did you find that to be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially in the Bodyharp case, it was the technology kind of encouraging this kind of interaction, because when I saw that there was like this controllers that you can actually like change the shape of the instrument, like you can use the strings to design in the performance, design the instrument itself. And even in like new musical instrument design, it's still very common to have a very fixed physical limitation, physical boundary of an instrument. So that was really interesting to me, like having an instrument that you have control over its shape. So that kind of like, I mean, it still has like certain affordances. You have strings, you can pluck them, you can stretch them, and they want to go back. So there's a tactile feedback, pulling your arm back, but you still have a lot of flexibility in movement and in the shape of the instrument. So it was really interesting to me.
Yeah, it's the strings. The idea of strings, musical strings, is like a starting place. You can go way beyond that in terms of the kinds of movements you can do with this. So the controllers look really interesting, especially that lower one. There's a lot going on. Can you tell us what parameters it's reading?
Yeah, so the lower part is holding the pulleys of these strings, and the strings have like a little joystick controller. It kind of controls three axes like X, Y, and to in the like the plane, horizontal plane, and then you can also like stretch the string up, so you have like the height of the string, or like your arm, whatever it's attached to it.
Yeah. Okay. So right. So it's reading angles and it's reading push pull.
Right.
There's some kind of spring loading to make it pull back in when
Yeah,
right.
yeah. There's kind of like a spring system. It kind of pulls it back.
Yeah. 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 When you play it, what does it feel like? I mean, or let me ask a better question than that. Um, One of the most interesting things here again is what it feels like to be doing these different movements, and then you hear what kind of sound comes out. And there's probably a learning process by which you gradually explore what kind of movement leads to what kind of sound. And if the mappings are well designed, then it you learn the sense of it, I'm guessing, right? And there would be a process by which this happens. The first time you play it, you may be a little clumsy, and then it's an exploratory process, it would seem like, right? How was it for you the first time you started playing it?
I think it was a great question to ask, like, how does it feel? Because there's so many different levels that it kind of like introduces the instrument. When you first interact with it, it's a new thing, so you don't really know like what it's going to do. And there is a variable part, so it really fixates your body, and your arm becomes part of the instrument. And if your arm is not there, the instrument is not complete. So there's a there's a very, I guess, like a strong connection between the musician's body and the instrument itself. So that's one interesting, I think, affordance of the instrument. And the other one is the sound. Like then like the mapping becomes a very strategic thing to think about, especially in this case when I had dancers and other musicians and composers playing it. I like had to I had to like attract all the levels of music knowledge, and and sometimes it was too complex, and sometimes it was actually too dynamic. And it was interesting to see how dancers interact with it, how like choreographers interact with the instrument, and how musicians expected it. And I saw that people with I guess, less musical exposure. They were more interested in just accepting the instrument as it is and try to find some, I guess, gestural patterns and then create those, repetitively, as opposed to musicians expecting strings also like the frequencies also like changing with the string length as in the physics of a string instrument. Um, so it was, yeah, it was an interesting exploration. There's definitely a learning curve, and I realized that people were able to find some interesting nuances in music, and they want to play with that. They want to explore those areas.
It's nice. They wanted to, is a nice thought.
Yeah.
Um, so you've done you've programmed several different mappings over time. Is it like you get the instruments and you can choose mapping number one, mapping number two, mapping number three? Or are you hoping to settle on one as being the established mapping that you would use?
That's a good question. I still change the mapping all the time, and I think it is possible. It's maybe better to settle and like practice the instrument and have like a level of mastery. But yeah, I definitely change it depending on the performance and like who's going to play it.
Hmm.
In the first trial that was like in 2018, we were playing in this natural reserve, so it was a very interesting soundscape already. So I was trying to actually like blend in with all this, the wind sounds and like the birds you're hearing. But in the second case, I actually want to start with like an imitation of a string instrument and want to be able to extend that through like audio effects and like some more like high level sound, shaping,
Hmm.
which is
You mentioned, sorry, you mentioned the phrase learning curve, and I wonder about that. You said there's a bit of a learning curve. Did it, does it feel like intuitive? I think of this idea before people invented bicycles, nobody would have known that you could even do this, ride a bicycle without tipping over, right? Then it turns out that somehow we human beings have this ability to manage our balance in such a way that we can take this artificial object called a bicycle and do all kinds of cool things with it. I can imagine something like that may be happening here. Did it feel like when you have this thing in your hand, you discover that there's some innate human readiness to learn something like that, and it becomes intuitive? Or is it like this totally artificial foreign thing? Like to me, learning to use a typewriter is artificial and foreign. Whereas riding a bicycle, oddly, we humans seem to have that in us already. What did it feel more like something that's already in us, learning to relate to this set of gestures?
some definitely, and some are a bit more complex and needs to be learned. So I always try to start with um, first no sound, just play the instrument, without hearing anything, and like see how it feels and what you can do. So that kind of gives doesn't like limit you with the sound mapping. So you're exploring. I can do this gesture, and like maybe you're going back when you start hearing sound and like see how it's going to make sense with sound. Um, and then I start to like introduce, one set of gestures. Like maybe start plugging now and see like how it works, and start changing the height of the instrument. See like what changes you hear. And I think when you actually introduce the instrument level by level, it helps the kind of like fastening the learning process. Um, there is also definitely an open, ended like exploratory process where even if I like kind of like designed it, I can still explore some, new like sonic, I guess, like ideas. And that's actually the dynamic part of the instrument. Like you can still just show up there and then like not be able to maybe play the same thing next time, but have like a different and like very unexpected surprise.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, one of the very nice things about this instrument, in the video that we just saw, you had many different dancers exploring it. Um, and when you were speaking about uh, felt sound, you talked a lot about the difference between the person who's playing the instrument and the people in the audience, right? This really feels to me like this instrument is made for the dancer more than it's made for the audience. That the real aesthetic experience would be the kinesthetic experience of finding your way in playing it and like exploring this virtual reality, you could say, that the instrument opens up to you. Do you find that that different people that the experience of being the person playing it is quite different from being the person listening?
Yeah, it is. I mean, definitely. I think it's a lot more engaging when you play it, and it's also meant to emphasize the first person experience of of a musician. So that's definitely the big motivation of the instrument behind it. Um, and you see, well, it really emphasizes people's background too. If you're a musician, the way that you interact is very different if you're a dancer. I saw, dancers carrying the instrument around, which for a musician, especially for a piano player, it's actually very strange to me.
Yes.
She hugged the instrument and then she was able to play it. I saw people just lying on the floor and interacting with the instrument and involving, their full bodies, with their feet, their legs, and it was, beyond that I thought that people would play. Um, but yeah, it was very incredible to see like all these different backgrounds coming together in the same instrument and like creating this very extended gestural space.
Yeah, I mean, you have musicians who respond to it one way and dancers who respond another. Then you have people like me, just a natural born klutz. We have to see what would happen. But really, what I think, what I love about this instrument, it seems to me, is that this is an instrument for the player more than it is for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the real aesthetic would be, it feels like to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I see people who are not comfortable dancing, but not even thinking about dancing or moving when they play the instrument, but their movements are so expressive because there's an interface to focus. You don't have to sometimes focus on yourself, but you still receive that, I guess, the same kinesthetic effect you would from dancing or any other movement practice.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I think we're doing pretty well here. Is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap up?
I think that was quite a lot that we talked. Yeah, that looks good to me.
Okay. Well, I want to say thanks to everybody, including the Center for New Music, to Anne-Marie Cordero for having pulled this whole thing together in terms of managing the Zoom meeting and doing some editing and so forth, and especially to you, Doa, for bringing this stuff to the Window Gallery. I'm so sorry that we didn't get to see it in person as a physical uh, immersive, because that's an important word in your work, as an immersive experience. But so it goes. So thank you to everybody. Toa, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting. It was wonderful to share and discuss, and it will be great to also like you said, like have people interacting with instruments in the window gallery, but for another time, I guess.
Another time, yeah.